my name is Sierra Robinson. I am a master's student at Liberty University. Today, I'm lecturing on trait theory. Much of what we know about personality trait is that it has a great deal to do with how we respond or behave in such a way. Trait theory is an approach to human personality, where theory is primarily focused on the measurements of traits, whereas then said that it could be pretty consistent in terms of our patterns and our behavior. Those measurements are retrieved from several different assessment devices, which gives us a good deal of information regarding a person's personality, interaction, and beliefs about the self as well as the world in which they live in. So the reality is only the reality that they make that thing to be. So this analysis draws the relationship between two patterns, the individual trait and situational state, which are conditions that gives us the dynamics of communication. Despite the conflicting research, there appears to be a consistent pattern amongst the 5 factors or personality traits. Those being openness is an outgoing individual, very liberal, interested in new things, very imaginative to reserved, conservative, traditional, and conforming. Conscientiousness is an organized individual, careful and determined to careless and weak-willed. Extroversion prefers group activities, large settings, and not afraid or don't get too intimidated when they're in the midst of a large population. Whereas the introvert, on the other hand, is the total opposite and prefers small groups. Agreeableness represents the extreme of stubborn versus easygoing or suspicious versus trusting. Neuroticism refers to the dimension of emotional stability. Someone who exhibits instability in their emotions, in their interactions, in relationships. Let's take the leadership trait as one of our case studies. So, leadership traits are heritable attributes that differentiate leaders from non-leaders while explaining individuals' effectiveness as leaders. Essentially, that which predicts a great leader is his or her behavior. So leadership research is evident both within the trait and behavior paradigms, as research within each paradigm particularly focuses on a single trait or behavior perspective. So we know that a leader will be a great leader or a good leader or an effective leader is because he or she inhabits that particular trait. So how do we know a leader is a leader? He is or she is tested through the thematic appreciation test, the 16 personality trait test, and a test designed to measure the big 5. For instance, an individual goes in, takes a test, and finds out that he or she is tested or scored as ENFJ. So these types of people are inclined to deal with matters as it relates to people and mainly with those that they love. So these few people are considered to be more intense and have intense relationships with their friends and the close loved ones, and so they will find themselves not engaged with or have more friends than they probably would like or probably not. So we do know that once these individuals are tested and they score a certain score, whether it's high or low, we tend to place them in certain categories. But this seems to be a problem because although this does test a person in that state of being, it doesn't necessarily give us the conclusion of their state. So a state is a temporary way of interacting and dealing with the self and others. For example, an introvert may be quiet or reserved, intellectual, and calm in most situations, but when they're around close friends, however, he or she seems quite outgoing and very exciting and something that you would never seen if you were sitting right next to him in your classroom. And the same goes for an extrovert. An extrovert may be really outgoing and love being around people, but then when he gets in certain situations or in the midst of a certain environment, may find him or herself more quiet than usual. So this seems to be a gap because we don't know whether or not those that are being tested are feeling a certain way at that moment when being tested. This is the same issue that we will find when we are placing individuals, because of that test, into certain categories in terms of career path. So if an individual is tested as a teacher in their career paths, but yet they are very successful in the work of politics, and but their score tells them something that they should have been differently. So now the issue is that if that individual is tested, and yet they go into an opposite career path, and as long as they're in that career path and they do it successfully, does that then constitute truth or validity? What seems to be of significant debate is the fact that the impact of a person's environment or learning style is not so much the most important thing, but according to theory, it can be expected that individual differences in how people communicate can be explained biologically as differences in individual brain functioning. So traits are based on temperament, which results from biochemistry of the brain. How you react in communication situation, rather aggressively or shyly, for instance, depends on what is going on in terms of the biochemical process in your brain. So how a person perceives a thing is how a person would respond to a thing. A method that has a significant effect on this research is attribution theory, which explains why people behave in certain ways. So, in situational causes such as being affected by the environment, personal effects influence things personally, ability being able to do something, effort trying to do something, desire wanting to do it, sentiment feeling like it, belonging going along with something, obligation feeling you ought to, and permission being permitted to. This research shows that people tend to make quick judgments based upon those things. We tend to perceive things just because a person acts the way they do, which makes this trait theory kind of faulty in some way. Despite this conclusion, it could be concluded that in theory, not one theory can be applied to all situations. So what we can conclude from the trait theory when speaking of leadership traits, that it has a very extensive and controversial history. While research shows that possession of certain traits alone does not guarantee leadership success, there is evidence that effective leaders are different from other people in certain respects. So some of those attributes that they may indeed have is that they have the desire to lead without any type of power to gain, or they have the emotional stability and cognitive ability and even knowledge in a particular area, which makes them more effective in that area. So exactly why is communication so important, and what does that have to do with trait theory? What we find meaning is from communicating with one another, and as effective Christians in doing the work that we were purposed to do. The scripture tells us in Proverbs 3:5 that and 6, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not to thine own understanding. 6, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. It's very important that when we know who we are as a person, we can easily be able to distinguish that which is God and that which is us, and be able to flow into who God has called us to be. So thank you so much for listening to the trait theory, and I hope you think and you found it so important for you to elaborate and to perfect more of who you are as an individual, so that you can be effective Christians and leaders. God bless you.